everyone, it's Claire. I know it's been a bit since we've updated people since our podcast season 2 ended, but I have some exciting news that I assume by the time you see this will be out, and it's that Emily and I were recently reached out to by a wonderful woman, Avery Neal, who works with therapy organizations and is a victims survivors advocate, dealing with abuse, all kinds of abuse, psychological, sexual, financial, domestic. And she recently interviewed us to talk about our own individual experiences. As you all, if you've been following along, have heard a lot about Emily's background, but maybe have not heard so much about mine, since it doesn't necessarily pertain to the classical community so much as it does the purity culture and religious community. As expected, it is hard to keep an interview like that concise when you're talking about grooming, and both of our sort of experiences span about 2 years of patterns and behaviors. If you've seen the raw footage of the episodes I've cut down, each recording that took about 3 hours, you'll know it is hard to narrow this stuff down. So I'm glad we've had some practice. There were some questions that we didn't quite get to, and I thought it might be interesting from my end to sort of answer those kind of as promotional material to sort of continue the conversation and encourage it, because I thought there were some very interesting things. It's hard to talk about your feelings without first giving the background of the story. Trying to do both at once is a lot, so this kind of gives me another place to sort of continue that conversation. I would encourage anyone to listen to that web interview first before listening to this, because it will make a little bit more sense to have that background first. One of the things that was sort of suggested as an interview question was, looking back, what thoughts and feelings did you have about what happened? And I think a lot of that was addressed. I think the most important thing for me was the blaming myself, the fact that I sort of became a PR campaign manager in order to explain what had happened to me, and sort of with the goal for me of covering my parents' reputation. That I got very well versed, and that I was lucky enough to be in therapy at the time. I learned how to tell my story. I learned factually that this wasn't my fault, that I was manipulated. But I didn't believe that yet. And there are still times when I struggle with that. But I remember how raw that felt, and how I felt like I just needed to push that feeling deep down in order to get through it. I know that while I could put on a public face, I felt like I had no self-esteem, no fight, nothing left, so that in any future ongoings, particularly as I was finishing up high school, where other boys tried to cross my boundaries, I felt like I had no fight. I felt like I didn't deserve to. Furthermore, I knew that I was never going to tell anyone, obviously different now, but at the time, ever again, because I had had my agency stripped from me in this particular situation. So I had zero intention of, in other cases where people took advantage of me, of ever telling anyone, because I was worn out.
What thoughts and feelings did you have about what you were experiencing? My feelings at the time were I completely believed what he was saying to me. I was blaming myself, like how he was blaming me. He said that he was doing this to me because I was blonde, I was skinny, I was attractive. I naturally just liked to wear dresses and skirts. It was because of all of these reasons that this was happening to me. And a lot of that stuff was stuff I couldn't control. I couldn't really control my hair color. I couldn't control my body shape. I couldn't control my facial features. There was a time that I was with his family and we were walking around heading back to the vehicle to go our separate ways. And I was joking around with one of his children, and I had shown them a little joke that I had learned when I was younger, is that while you're walking, you could walk in front of somebody and all of a sudden stop walking, and then that person would bump into you and be like, what are you doing? And it was something silly. So we were joking around with that. And then that child decided to do it to their father, which was my abuser. After they had done it, the father knew what was already going to happen. So then I had done it to see if I could trick them. And I did, and he walked right into me. And I remember I looked back up at him, and there was this look on his face that I had never really seen before. And it stuck with me. There was something about it that stuck with me. And then I had put 2 and 2 together, that his face, when he wouldn't stop, and he was abusing me in his office, and he claimed he couldn't stop, it was this glazed look on his face that was the exact same look when he had walked into me from behind. And I would blame myself constantly for that one time that I did that, thinking, oh gosh, it was the time he walked into me that turned him on, and that was my fault. At times, I had genuine concern and appreciation towards him because at many times he was very kind to me. He apologized for sexually assaulting me several times. He would hug me, he would let me cry in his arms. He knew about my favorite composer, that I love this composer, so he would go through books in his office and he'd be like, oh, I think you're gonna love this book here. And he would give those to me and get me very excited because he knew I loved learning. And he isolated me so that the only one that was asking me about my day, or a person I could talk to about just basic things in classes I was doing or something new I was gonna try, like he was that person. He was the only one that I had because of his isolation. He was the only person to have ever called me beautiful before. All of that was all grooming, but it was that kindness that had brainwashed me, and that's what I was thinking. He'd also gone as far as to guilt trip me, which goes further with blaming myself, saying I should not be this upset because of what he did. Went as far as to him comparing me to the war in Ukraine, claiming that people had it worse than me, so I should not be upset with what he had done to me. I also didn't believe that it was sexual assault at the time. He had said, guys get stupid and they can't stop at a certain point. That's just how it is. So I believed that what he was doing to me when I would say no, well, he just couldn't stop. So it didn't matter what I said. Like, that's just how it is. And had operated more on the premise of, no, sexual assault is in an alley with a stranger and it happens suddenly. Not that it's this grooming and psychological preparation to have you be able to not do anything about it and not be able to escape it. And then lastly, I was in extreme denial. I was having so many sick episodes. I called them IBS attacks at the time because I had IBS, but those were nothing like IBS attacks. I was throwing up. I was having diarrhea. I had lost so much weight. I was severely malnourished. My BMI was dangerously low. I had to go in for a super expensive CT scan. I was on so many new medications and nothing was working. They found nothing in the scan. The only time things changed was when the semester ended and he was not physically around me any longer. It was drastic. 3 days and I wasn't sick, and that was unheard of. I was getting sick several times a day. Then at that point, when I was still in communication with him for a little bit longer before I reported, I was only getting sick from occasional phone calls and texts with him being abusive.
Another question is, what would I tell my younger self to do? And I kind of thought that was interesting because I wanted to flip it and say not what I would tell my younger self to do, but just what I would tell my younger self. Because the fact of the matter is I got through it. I didn't lose my mind completely. I got out of the situation, and in any kind of sexual abuse, the only thing that really matters is survival. And that sounds dramatic because we're not talking about having my life literally threatened, but we are talking about my mental health getting to a very low place. And so honestly, I don't care if I had handled it differently because I can't go back. I think she did the best she could in that situation. And so if I could go back and tell my younger self anything, I think I would just thank her because I think that's what she deserved. I think oftentimes when we think about our younger selves and what we would say to them, we picture ourselves in a motherly position or big sister position. And for me, my younger self kind of gave birth to me. My younger self is my mother in a sense. Her existence and the things that she did and survived allowed me to become the person I am today. Obviously with a more developed brain, more ability to articulate what I've gone through, more therapy under my belt. And she didn't have those tools and was doing the best that she could. And so I really think the only thing that I would want to do if I could go back is to tell her thank you and to tell her that I didn't squander the opportunities that she laid out for me, and that despite the ongoing triggers and trauma and the things that I will have to work through my entire life, that I am so grateful for the place that I was able to get to, the things that I've been able to do. And that's all because of her, even if it was a clumsy journey to get there.
This question makes me kind of want to cry thinking about little me. I feel like part of my answer is going to sound a little bit crazy. First thing is I would tell myself what the police officer who did my report said to me, but much, much earlier during the abuse. This is not your fault. None of it is your fault. She needed to hear that way earlier. then at that point when I had finally heard that. For justice, I would tell my younger self to try to get his admission over text before escaping the abuse. Now I understand how the system works, so I would encourage that collecting of evidence, because at the time, my brain would go back and forth. I knew I needed to protect myself because he was threatening me, but I also didn't want to hurt him while he was abusing me. He was having panic attacks, he had claimed, because he was worried I was going to tell somebody. And I saw him like a father. It was like a father. Imagine your father having panic attacks, begging you to do something kind for him after he had done kind things for me. And it was his guilt tripping that did so much to me. So I think that's very important, is I would have told myself, you can't escape the abuse yet. Get the evidence first. Because I'm that kind of person. I'm a fighter. So that would have worked for me. I knew that it was very important to me to get that evidence so I would be safe, but also because I would have wanted to do something further with it. And then lastly, I would have told myself, hold on, life will get better again. There was a time in his office that I told him, because of him sexually assaulting me, he had made it to a point where I no longer wanted to live, and I was having thoughts of wanting to take my life, and I'd never felt that way before, and I was afraid, so I was telling him because I didn't know what to do. And he went into his desk and he took out a pair of scissors and he handed it to me, and he said, okay, kill yourself. Do it right now. And then he started screaming at me because I didn't do it, and he was throwing things, and it was really bad. I had blocked the rest of that out, but it was bad. And I had made a plan then for the first time that if he sexually assaulted me again at the beginning of the next school year, I was going to take my life. And I didn't believe life would get better. Even when I spoke out and I reported, I was still living with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I didn't think my life was ever going to get any better. And if I had been told, wait, yes, it takes time, but just wait, things are going to get better, it would have made that much more bearable, and I wouldn't have been doubting and questioning my ability to survive the abuse from then. Since then, I have became a figure skating coach, and I've started skating again for myself, and I have found friends and safety working with all women there. And I, for the first time, had a feeling of, wow, I actually feel safe here. I never thought I would have that feeling again. So life does get better. And if you're living in abuse, you do have to know that life does get better, and it will get better. It takes time, you have to be patient, but it is worth it when it gets to that point. I would like to say, I didn't really go along with the abuse solely to sustain my career path. We have to take into account he was threatening to destroy my life. He did make me feel physically unsafe if I didn't comply. He screamed, he threw things. I was so malnourished, I was so sick, I couldn't think anything except survival. So while saying, no, I don't want to do this, please don't make me do this, sobbing, backing up, he just continued anyway. And I don't know if I can comfortably say I went along with the abuse. I didn't report it, but I did not want to do anything. It just happened to me. He had threatened a student of concern form on me, which would basically be what he had explained to me was I'd be forced to leave school because they deem me as unfit to continue the program. This is kind of a false threat from him, from what I've heard from other students now that understand what that form is. But the form did exist, and he had power, he had tenure, he had a reputation. I was new. And I was manipulated to believe that that was true. And I had worked my butt off all of high school. My life, everything I had built for myself when I started violin at the age of 12 was to make it to conservatory, was all for my career. That was all I did in high school. I went to district festivals. I went to All-State. I was in youth orchestra programs, several youth orchestra programs, high school groups. I did every opportunity that could come to me to try to make it. I survived isolation and a pandemic. I didn't want to go home. This is everything I'd worked for, my life. And he knew that home was not a safe or happy place for me. And I was thriving at school. He knew it would destroy my entire career. He had claimed that everybody would hate me and my reputation would be ruined before I even really had the opportunity to make one for myself. He ended up being wrong about this, right? When I came out with my story, of course, people were angry with what he had done, but he was also right. You know, my best friend was so just disgusted by the entire story, that she just wanted nothing to do with me anymore. And she told me that, and she stopped contacting me. And there was a music camp I'd worked at for 3 years. It was going to be my 4th year. And they labeled me a whistleblower because I'd spoken out about this professor, and they said they didn't want me to be there anymore. I could probably count on one hand everybody that spoke to me after I spoken out from school. There were not many people that wanted to be around me, and some because it was hard because they had their own stories or they knew the professor and they were so disturbed by it, but others because they just cared more about themselves. There was insane harassment that I had faced, and professors making comments to me, and I had to put up with so much because predators are working everywhere in music, and those who decide who get the jobs with power protect them or are predators themselves.
Do I have any advice for women and girls who may be watching, or anyone who has been victimized in any way? The first thing I would say is there's no threshold that counts as you have to have this happen to you to be traumatized by it. If your body is interpreting it as trauma, that is valid. And most sexual abuse stories do not follow the most clean, sympathetic package. In my case, a lot of people don't think of grooming as something that happens between peers, and in a legal sense it doesn't. But the pattern absolutely followed the 7 stages of grooming, and the psychological component and the effect of that it had on me was identical to that of traditional stories of grooming where you think of adult child. So your trauma is sufficient for whatever reactions you've had and whatever level of support you need. Just like there's no sick enough if you're mentally ill, there's no abused enough to deserve help. So no matter how unique your story is or underrepresented stories like yours are, the effect and the emotional damage is real, and you deserve to receive the help that you need for that. I would also like to remind people that there are more of us. There are more survivors than there are predators. It doesn't feel like it sometimes, but there are. And there is strength in those numbers, and that so many people, almost all women, and a hell of a lot of men, have a story that they can relate to. And speaking, even if you're not making yourself a public figure, that speaking to people that you trust and sharing stories and hearing stories is incredibly healing. Being able to tell my story on my own terms has made me very comfortable with telling it, and it has been incredibly healing in taking my power back. While there are absolutely things that are ongoing, I'm so much happier and stronger now than I've ever been. And that's in spite of things that have happened to me and not because of them. Nevertheless, I don't think I would change anything because I don't want to be anybody else. And that doesn't mean that I'm grateful for things that never should have happened to me. That does mean that I can reclaim the focus and say, well, it's not really about what happened. It's about what I've done with my life. And that's true for anyone. Last thing that I would say is, particularly if you come from a religious convention like me, and particularly for women, let go, if this resonates with you, let go of the pressure to forgive. I think there's a lot of rhetoric, there are a lot of very quotable phrases out there about how withholding forgiveness is taking poison and hoping the other person dies, and this idea that to be truly healed, you need to forgive. And when you are raised in an environment that tells you that no sin is greater than any other, and that if somebody is repented before God, they have a clean slate, but if you're withholding forgiveness, that is as big a sin as what was done to you. And so therefore, you can have a situation where, as far as you know, who cares if it was sincere or not? That's not your position to judge. An abuser has repented, and you have not forgiven, and now suddenly you are the only one in the wrong. So for my situation, the idea of forgiveness was extremely toxic in this particular situation. And it was something, a convention that I freed myself from. I took that obligation out of my life, and I'm incredibly grateful that I did. It's not a burden that I'm holding on to. It's something that I've freed myself from. I have no reason to do that. I have no desire to do that, and I won't, because I need to get reacquainted with my anger. And I think a lot of women need to get reacquainted with anger. Anger has a lot of wisdom in it, Your anger can be very energizing, very motivating. Don't be afraid of it. It will take you to good places, and the only way out of it is through. And remember that the cycles of grief, the cycles of healing, they're not linear. They're cyclical, and you will go through different stages with different triggers, different life events. And so when that anger comes back, it's telling you something valuable. It's not something to try to rush through or to feel guilty about feeling, because that anger is there for your own survival and to learn to re-engage with it and to listen.
And finally, last question. There is no such thing as a safe man. I hate to take that innocence away, because I used to live that way and it was a comforting way to live. Sometimes I think I wish I could go back to before the abuse, before I met him, and I just lived in this like the world is safe and comfortable and the world's my oyster. I can do what I want. I'm going to be fine. But I'd rather that you don't have that innocence so you don't have to endure what I did. Debunk the myth that most dangerous men are strangers. That's what we're taught is stranger danger growing up. That takes I don't have the exact percentage, but 1% of these cases. It is not the weird men in messy clothes. It is the men in specifically, usually Catholic or Christian churches. It is the men that have wives. It is the men with children. It is the male teachers. It's the ones that you least expect, who have created a high reputation for themselves, that you love and appreciate, that you think are safe people. Those are the ones that do these things.
I hope that these ongoing conversations are helpful or inspiring or just create camaraderie for anyone who needs it. If anyone ever wants to talk more to me, you feel free to reach out on my own page at Undead Mezzo. I do not consider it trauma dumping. I love hearing other people's stories. I am so proud of everyone I know who has shared what they've gone through and survived it. I'm glad that we have a platform now to facilitate some of these conversations. I think it's been very healing, very inspiring. If you can relate to any part of my story, I send you my love, my sympathy, and I believe that you are strong.